Today we are with Professor Pius Malekandathil, who is a historian of medieval and early modern South Asia. He focuses and specializes on maritime history, particularly of the Indian Ocean, and with a thrust on Portuguese history. He's a man of many languages. He knows Portuguese, Dutch, English, Latin, German, Malayalam, and in our third semester, when we were doing our MA here at the Center for Historical Studies in JNU, Professor Pius provided us a course on the history of Sufism in South Asia, and then again later he was doing a course on urbanism, and we could connect these two courses because he spoke on how Sufism and Sufi networks led to the development of urbanity in South Asia, particularly in northern India, in the Indo-Gangetic plains. How Sufism and the Sufis who migrated to the subcontinent helped in the development of kasbahs, markets, and how dargahs and other institutions of the Sufis actually facilitated the urban revolution that India experienced in the medieval period. So thank you, sir, for agreeing to give us this interview, and we are very privileged to have you as one of our contributors for the module. We'll begin by asking you that regarding the process of urbanization itself and the pattern of urbanization. We know that Richard Eaton in his monumental work has argued that the process of urbanization and Islamization that went hand in hand together in the province of Bengal, which is far east in the South Asia, happened because of the penetration of the Sufis who settled there, and they initiated agriculture, gradually converting the forests of that inhospitable land into cultivable pastures, and they made it a habitable zone. Now, how different was the pattern of Sufism's urbanization and settlement in Delhi, which by the middle of the 14th century came to be known as the capital of the Islamic East? How would you look at that?
Yeah, when we look at the process of Islamization in East Bengal, we find clearance of forest happening, and we find people moving towards more and more cultivational activities by reclaiming the forest land. And the forest dwellers are being converted into cultivators, and we find rice cultivation being expanded over there. And simultaneously, we find on the maritime side the Portuguese conducting trade, buying rice from the newly reclaimed land, and we find tying up of primary production with the exchange activities on the coastal side, which stimulated the economic activities in the hinterland as well. So Portuguese private traders were rice traders as well, and when we link both the activities, we find the process of economic stimulation getting accelerated in the hinterland, which in the long run led to urbanity in that region, and later with the emergence and with the increasing demand for textiles, we find some of these places specializing in textile production in eastern Bengal, particularly in the vicinity of Dhaka and the neighborhood. And many of these centers, we find the Portuguese traders going there, purchasing, procuring textile items and taking to sometimes to Mozambique, sometimes to Portugal, sometimes to Southeast Asia. So we find there is a great amount of larger connectivity between different sets of economic actors and players. When the Sufi space, we find certain type of economic actors evolving from agrarian production, later moving towards textile weaving activities. Later, we find urbanization process getting intensified, stimulated. Such centers eventually became urban centers by the end of the 17th century, beginning of the 18th century, thanks to the mixing up of two different types of economic forces from two different directions. When we come to Delhi, we find a different trajectory, in the sense Delhi happened to be the power center. Right. The Mehroli Delhi, which happened to be the core area of power process from the time of Qutbuddin Aibak up to probably Ghiyasuddin Balban, Mehroli happened to be the core area of power process. Later, by the last years of Ghiyasuddin Balban, we find Ghiyaspur being developed as a secondary city on the banks of river Yamuna. And simultaneously, we find influx of people happening from Central Asia, from Abbasid Persia, and from West Asia because of the Mongol attack and the consequent upheaval that happened by the middle of the 13th century. So when 1258, when Abbasid Caliphate got shattered and Baghdad got defeated on the before the invading forces of the Mongols, we find artisans, Sufis, Sufi sheikhs and scholars flowing to Delhi, where there was relative security, relative protection, relative safety because of the strong ruler and because of the so-called blessings of the Sufi sheikhs in Delhi. Starting from Qutbuddin Bakhtiar Kaki onwards, there was a general understanding that Delhi was protected and blessed by the Sufi sheikh. Right. And these artisans, Sufi dervishes and the scholars, they settled not only in Mehrauli but also in Ghiyaspur, and we find even Mongols coming and settling down in Ghiyaspur. And during the time of Muizzuddin Kaikubad, we find the Kilokari being developed as a tertiary city, and during the time of Jalaluddin Khilji, it was developed as his prime capital, as the major town. And he invited traders to come and settle down there, and he initiated the construction process over there. So we find a different type of socio-economic and political condition evolving in Delhi, which facilitated the type of urbanization in Delhi. When we come to Delhi, still further, another thing is also to be noticed. But from the time of Alauddin Khilji, Delhi Sultanate took pan-Indian dimension. After having occupied Devgiri and gone up to Rameshwar in deep south, the entire subcontinent got integrated with Delhi, and wealth started flowing to Delhi. And the iktas being given in the south, though they were in the south, wealth used to get siphoned off to Delhi through the ikta system. And so wealth used to converge in Delhi because of the new developments starting from 1295 onwards. So this is the time of Nizamuddin Awliya. So Nizamuddin Awliya did not come in a vacuum. He came into a socio-economic context which had intense material inflow from different dimensions, from different directions. This is a time when Alauddin Khilji needed a standing army being paid with cash. Around 3 lakh soldiers were being kept as a part of his standing army, and they were being located in Siri. That would mean there's a heavy demand for feeding the 3 lakh of soldiers. So on the one side, wealth flow, on the other side, the need for more provisions for feeding the standing army. Then on the tertiary side, lot of artisans were also flowing. Alauddin Khilji needed around 70,000 artisans, craftsmen, for building and beautifying his new capital. That would mean city experienced a new type of labor process, new type of wealth flow, new great demand for provision and food stuff, which was not there earlier. So we have to look into the historical context, socio-cultural, economic context within which Alauddin Nizamuddin Awliya emerged as the Sufi Sheikh, and within which Jiaspur, Kilokari, Siri and Mahroli evolved as urban centers, the most important urban centers. So the new process, intensified by movement of people, movement of wealth and movement of commodities, affected not a mere one or two pockets alone. It influenced the primary city, that is Mahroli. It influenced the trajectories of secondary city of Jiaspur and Kilokari, and also the new military camp that got evolved at Siri. The people who are living here in these places, they needed new direction, new orientation, new meaning in their life on reaching Delhi. And the meaning was given by the Sufi Sheikh who became the guardian of the city, that is Nizamuddin Awliya. And people started flocking his khanqa, seeking his advice, seeking his blessing. And they had their own problems. They, in a space which is entirely alien, which is different from their homeland, where they don't have any relatives, and they had their own tensions, their own anxiety, their own psychological problems, for which they found Sufi space as the only space where they could get some sort of solace, consolation and comfort. And they used to convert. Who are these people? The city laborers, the city workers, the city craftsmen who were involved in the building of the new city. They are coming, many of them are coming from agrarian background, some of them are coming from West Asia, some of them are coming from other geographies. And the only place where they could orient themselves, where they could find a meaning, happened to become, the Sufi space happened to become the space that gave them a direction as to where they should go, as to how to find meaning in a strange land, in a foreign land, and find some sort of sense out of the new space. And in this place, so against this context, we have to look into Jiaspur, the khanqa of Nizamuddin Awliya, and see what happened. Who were the social base, who happened to be the social base for Nizamuddin Awliya's khanqa? Basically, these people, the artisans, the non-free laborers, the slaves, around 180,000 slaves were being employed almost a few decades later during the time of Firoz Shah Tughlaq for beautifying Firoz Shah Kotla. So meaning a large number of slaves were also there, large number of artisans were there. They were converging in the khanqa of Nizamuddin Awliya. They needed a message different from the type of message that they used to get from mosque, from Jama Masjid. And this message is being conveyed by the accommodative space only. That would mean a space that could accommodate people coming from different religion, a space that could accommodate people coming from different linguistic background, from ethnic background. They have been given a certain amount of accommodative inclusion, some sort of inclusive character only in a Sufi space where the perception of Wahdatul Wujud, everybody is part and parcel of one and the same being, from that's the Almighty, from whom everybody has got emanation and to which everybody has been moving towards. And that sense of Wahdatul Wujud, which prevailed in Sufi space, made the accommodative culture, the inclusive culture to prevail upon there. As a result of which, people from different linguistic background, ethnic background, social background, they used to assemble Sufi khanqa of Nizamuddin Awliya, seeking his blessings, seeking his guidance, seeking his advice and suggestions. And very often they went there for getting blessings, miracles, actual healings, and they got it. some of them, probably because of the psychological, as a psychological reaction to the type of submission they and surrender they gave to the Sufi. I mean, this is a psychological experience probably. We can't explain these things rationally, but it bolstered their confidence level. It bolstered their psychological perception about the new situation. It gave them some sort of courage to face the reality. Moreover, it also, most of the people associated with such Sufi space happen to be workers, craftsmen, people involved in secondary sector activities. So these people now got a new message, a message that favored the culture of work, that helped them to promote and to undertake work as a decent type of occupation. Work was looked down upon in the agrarian background from where they have been coming. Now in this space, work has been considered as something with which they could create the world. And because people who have been coming over there were all workers, city laborers. So the culture of work got great amount of acceptability in that space. So when we look at the entire process, we find many of the people attached to the Kanka, and later the Dargah of Nizamuddin happened to be the city laborers who got a certain sense of pride in being workers, and that bolstered their confidence level as well. Because in the process of movement of commodities from the remote hinterland to Siri or to Mehroli or to Kilokari, they had to be halted at different hubs of movement. And Jaspur was one among them, and Kilokari was another. And in this hubs of movement, they used to assemble for prayer, for advice, the people who were involved in the movement of commodities and the movement of animals, cattle, or etc. So there they used to be, they used to assemble at such places seeking his advice. Such places eventually became places of information networking. So though the people who are coming from different background, but there is a great amount of commonality among them because of the class background from where they are coming, that is the working tradition, working culture. And from them, the traders used to get information about the market conditions, the price conditions, the details about the procurement, etc., etc. So the traders also used to settle down there for a while, grabbing the information about the market conditions. And traders also needed the support of Sufi Sheikh because they had to travel through the wild space. In the wild space, the vilayat of Nizamuddin was needed for protecting themselves when odd situations come, when wild animals appear, when bandits fall upon them. They thought that Nizamuddin would protect them because they were moving within the vilayat of Nizamuddin. And they used to spend some time in the neighborhood of the Kanga or Dargah in Thanksgiving. Even now we find people going to Dargah of Nizamuddin in Thanksgiving, not only for asking, but also for Thanksgiving as well. So in this process, what will happen is there is a certain amount of convergence of producers and traders. The Sufi Kanga became some sort of platform for the convergence of people involved in production. Though they may not be investing the wealth, but they may be conducting the production activity, the piece production. So the producers and the exchanges, the traders, they get a platform. Kanga provide a platform for them to converse together, to come together, to meet together, to interact, and there happen interactions of different nature, interactions of information, interaction of technology, interaction of know-how, interaction of information about the quality.
What kind of material culture do we see evolves out of particularly the khankas, and also so many traders and other people coming and taking residences up in the khankas, and different hinterlands getting linked up to the urban centers? So do we see an emergence of a new material production and material culture? Because we know that Sufi saints and dervishes and their followers used to adhere to a particular dress code, and so that might have required a particular kind of cloth. And also, like, the Sufi saints used to sit on sheepskins and other such stuff. So what are your views on that, sir?
When I say that there is a networking of trade happening, it's not connected with the material developments within the Kanga. Right. The Kangas usually have got their own granaries and stores for keeping grains and foodstuffs, as in the case of the Suhravardiyas. Even the Chishtiyas used to probably have something of that nature, because the langar, the tradition of langar and free food obviously need storing places. But that doesn't mean storing of food for a long span of time. This time should be equated with the developments in Maghroli and Kilokati and other places where Alauddin Khilji imposed control. The grain market, the horse market, the slave market, and then the market for general store, general items, etc. Right. So, but this is a time when too much of money was pumped into the market, right, because of the monetization, right, payment in cash. So when we come back to Kanga, the neighborhood of Kanga would create certain type of quasi-markets, right, because the people live there for a considerable span of time. Right. Wherever people live for a considerable span of time, there would be certain type of selling and buying happening on a smaller nature initially, but later we find some sort of long-standing market mechanisms evolving. Right. So the celebrations, the Urs or the any other type of celebration happening around Sufi Kanga and Dargah or within the Sufi space would involve a certain type of economic activity. Not for the Kanga per se, but for sustaining the people associated with Kanga. So some sort of market mechanism would evolve, and if the celebration lasts for 1 week or 2 weeks, right, there would be some sort of fair-like economic mechanism evolving where buying and selling happens on a considerable scale, and it is from such mechanism that the urbanity got accelerated in such places. And we find if you go to any dargah of Delhi, whether it's Pakhtiyar Kaki's dargah or Nasruddin Chirag's dargah is rather in a remote hinterland or village where there is no much buying and selling, or many stores or shops are available in plenty. But in other dargahs in the vicinity, we find different shops coming up to attend to the need of pilgrims, right, to attend to the need of the holy visitors. Right. So this happened to be the nucleus, right, for the evolution of urban process in the long run. So we find elsewhere, down in south or even the coastal part of Kerala or other regions as well, wherever there were Mijlis or Kanga or Dargah, they acted as nucleus for the urbanity that evolved over a period of time. And when we look at Jiaspur or Kilokari, we find the urban consolidation happened around the Kanga and later the Dargah of Nizam Nawaliya. Though the dynamics for urbanity came from the ruler Moisuddin Kaikubad or Jalaluddin Khalji. But we find who were the people who were getting linked with these studies, mostly associated with the cultural space of Nizamuddin Awliya's Khanqa and then later the Dargah. So the stimulation for urbanization happened in and around Jiaspur because of the motors, because of the engines of Khanqa and Dargah of Nizamuddin Awliya.
Now coming to the religious part of Khanqas, Professor Khalid Ahmed Nizami almost 4 decades back wrote an article on Khanqa life where he remarked that the history of popular religion in Islam runs parallel to the growth and expansion of the Khanqa organization. And when we go through Malfuzat literature and Sufi manuals, particularly that of Sheikh Shihabuddin Surawardi, he laid down certain fundamental principles that was to be followed by a Sufi for the proper organizational life of a Khanqa. Now, how do you see Khanqas performing that kind of a spiritual function for the populace at large? What were the spiritual functions that a Khanqa performed, and how was the Sufi Sheikh, the character of the Sufi Sheikh, with his charisma, with the miracles associated with him? How could he draw devotees and followers? Were there any examples of conversion? Could you tell us something about the religious milieu that a Khanqa drew up in the medieval times?
Khanqa meant a different type of religious milieu. It's unlike a mosque, unlike the religious space of any institutionalized religion. It is a space of pluvial religion, in the sense there is a certain amount of syncretic practice, certain amount of cultural syncretism evolving in the Sufi space, where people from different religious background could easily get accommodated, could easily get incorporated into. Entry into mosque is decided on the basis of your adherence to Islamic faith. If you follow Islam, only if you are a Muslim, you are allowed to enter a mosque. But here, anybody could come in. So people from different faith background and traditions and belief system, they could enter, they could participate in the dhikr or in the sama or in any prayer process, and the very space itself used to provide some sort of consolation to them. So they used to pray with the Sufi Sheikh or the leader or the spiritual leader. That's the meaning of Qawwali. I mean, why they are being all singing with dance? They are in trance. They are in trance along, not only they themselves, the entire group is in trance. And this is a mystical experience of religion, a mystical version of the religion. The mystical version is the emotion that is more important than the rational component and the ritual component. So they feel that they are one with Allah. They feel that they are in union with Allah, and the neighborhood is also in that feeling, and that emotional trance. They are singing, they are dancing together, and they are experiencing a new type of emotion which is never had in any other space. And there, in the trance, they feel that they are being healed, they are being cured, their problems are answered, their issues are given some sort of answers, their problems get solved. So some sort of emotional atmosphere is being created because of the religious or because of the type of mystical experience created over there, and that psychologically bolsters and works, giving them a new type of meaning about their own problem, about their own sickness, about their own oddities, meaning the very emotional turbulence through which they have been passing through which they are going through, used to give them a transformation, as to understand that, okay, I am with Allah, and in Allah my problems are solved. My tears are being wiped away. They feel they are being strengthened and emboldened and empowered. They feel their burdens are being relieved of. So this is a psychological experience. I don't say that it's a rational experience. So in that psychological experience, once they get an answer, they find that to be the sacred space. Not the sacred space of the institutionalized religion. Because even by retaining the faith components of the old belief system, they could enter this space and undergo the same emotional experience again and again, and come annually on a pilgrimage for Thanksgiving or placing more requests. So this provides space for flexible way of participating in religious experience. That made many people. I have seen some people coming from as far as Assam in something Avliya's Dargah recently. They come to pray. They are sitting in the corner. Sometimes they come to closer to the tomb of Southern Avliya. Sometimes they go and sit in the corner. They think that the entire space is blessed. The entire space has a certain amount of divinity, and they sit, they get consoled, their problems are answered, they go back home with a certain amount of satisfaction, certain amount of being blessed. I mean, this is one type of religious experience, different from the religious experience that people get in an institutionalized space. That's much more ritualistic, much more mechanical, much more homogeneous, standardized, and much more uniform. Here, each one can perceive the meaning in his own or her own individual way. So if I look at the entire thing, this flexibility is something intrinsic to the religious experience over there. It's not the mosque in the vicinity of the Dargah or Kanga which is more important. It's the Dargah, it's the tomb. And the Sufi Sheikh, whether alive or dead, he's the source of power. He is the source of miracle. He is the source of curing. So that used to give some sort of a different perception. And this is a different version of Islam. Though it's a part of Islam, it's probably many Muslims may not consider it as a name, as a right way of following the religion. That's true for them. For the people coming from different faith tradition and belief systems, they find it's another way of experiencing religiosity.
So when we are talking about Sufism and doctrinal Islam, like they are usually seen as polar opposites on sitting on different ends of the spectrum, and history is replete with examples of encounters between mystics and theologians, the Sufi Sheikh and the ulama. So in this scenario, how, like in the growing popularity of the Sufi saints and the pilgrimage to dargahs, how do you see the ulama as upholders of doctrinal Islam reacting to this growing influence of Sufism amongst the people and otherwise?
The problem started with the conflict between the ritual and the official version of Islam on the one side, and the mystical version of Islam on the other side, that is Sufism. And for mystical experience, the mystics develop their own methods and techniques, which may not be coming within the ambit of the formal religion, the official religion, the ritualistic religion. That caused the entire conflict to happen. The Sama, mainly the major Bona contention was Sama, and the mystical traditions that the Sufi sheikhs resorted to. They all wanted the Sharia tradition, the ritual tradition to be maintained. But the Sufis, as Muhyiddin Chishti said, till now you have been going, you have been going around the Kaaba. Now you go around around myself. So, there is a shifting from the official pilgrimage around Kaaba, and that has been diverted to the symbol of divinity, the symbol of divine force. That is the Sufi Sheikh, and the people are being made to go around the alternative point of divinity. That is Sufi Sheikh. This is a different perception of religion, view of religion. I am not in a position to say that which is the right view of religion and which is the wrong view of the religion. As a historian who is looking at it, for me, they are all different ways of understanding religion, different ways of living the religion, and different ways how they found solace and consolation and comfort in their life. In that sense, I find these different strands to be worth studying. And when we come to the question again, there was conflict in the initial phase when Islam was a minority in India, particularly in the 13th century. Islam was a minority, and non-Hindus were the majority. And the ulemas always wanted the ritual and the formal form of Islam to be maintained. And the Sufi sheikhs, probably to attract more non-Muslim people to the Sufi spaces, Ganga or Dargah, they followed many of the syncretic practices.
Right.
But later, once Islam got solidified, and Islam became one of the major belief systems in North India. By 16th century, 17th century, we find many of the Sufi sheikhs following theology almost meticulously. Take the case of Qadiriyas or Naqshbandiyas. So they are good theologians as well. Some of them were theologians as well. So some of them were Sunni Orthodox theologians as well, besides being Sufi sheikhs. So it's not necessary that there should be always an binary opposite relationship between Sufi sheikh and ulema. It happened at one point of time, but there was a period of time when that conflict got reduced, and we find Sufi sheikhs operating also as theologians, as learned scholars, as guiding people. So it used to change. Even the meaning of Sufi Sheikh changed over a period of time on the basis of the changing cultural and religious requirements and the general faith background of the audience as well. They also used to change their. Once the audience happened to be 90% or 100% Muslims, they then started assuming the role of actual ulemas as well at times. So I don't say that Sufis were always ulemas. At times they used to be ulemas, and that too a small microscopic minority. And all those Sufi sheikhs were not against the theologians. Few were, because they found God realization would happen only by following a mystical tradition, not by ritualistic tradition, not by following the path of formal religion. So they maintained their own individual perception of religion, and as a result of which they followed a tradition which is different from the ulema tradition, which necessarily brought in conflicts of different scale and level during this period.
In a similar vein, when you were talking about these relationships and the dichotomous aspect that existed between Chistis who were in conflict with the ulemas and then Naqshbandiyas and Qadiris who were theologians themselves. Similarly, how can we conceptualize in the medieval period the relationship between the Sufis and the political establishment? We've seen that Alauddin Khalji and Nizamuddin Auliya had shared a very ambiguous relationship. There were some Sufis who were in conflict with the sultans, and then again in the Deccan we have the example of Gisidaras, who helped to establish the Sultanate order in the Bahmani order in the Deccan. So how do we how can we understand the relationships and the tensions that existed between Sufis and the Sultans?
When we address this question, I feel that this is on the one side, it was rather a personal issue. Whether a Sufi sheikh should collaborate with political power or whether should keep a distance. Sufis, probably Sufi sheikhs, they realized that they were the source of a certain type of authority. And it was not political authority, it was rather moral and spiritual authority. And moral and spiritual authority was and is weightier than political authority at times. They can, because the social mobilization could be done on a large scale and havoc could be created more than physical attack. If the spiritual and the moral authority decide for that, meaning they have the great weightage over and above the political authority. So always the sultans were aware of it and they were a bit scared. And the largest gathering in Delhi or in other places was actually the Sufi space, whether it's Ganga or Dargah, where people used to flock for the reasons I mentioned earlier. And these people coming from different background, and at times there were co-sharers of power also coming over there. And this large gathering in such places always raise certain potential threats to the rulers. And seeing the possibility of converting this large gathering as followers, many rebels also used to seek asylum and blessing of the Sufi sheikhs in their Gangas or Dargahs. So it meant moral and spiritual authority, but it eventually had a larger social power of a considerable nature, and later became a cubicle of power, a center of power with political connotations and meanings. Once the rebel princes of the ruling family or the contenders of power used to visit such places, and the rulers were always cautious about such developments. And the rulers always wanted the Sufi space, the Sufi sheikh, to be cooperative with the power process of the ruler. He did not want to antagonize, the Sultan did not want to antagonize the Sufi sheikh, nor keep the Sufi sheikh as a opposite camp, challenging his authority. It is against this background that one should look at the relationship that evolved between Alauddin Khilji and Nizam Awliya. Because Alauddin Khilji came to power not through normal peaceful channels. When Jalaluddin Khilji was being killed, there was a huge cry and resistance against it, and he literally purchased the support for his political usurpation by lavishly throwing the gold and wealth that he brought from Devgiri and from the south. So, and for legitimizing his usurpation of power, he needed the support of a Sufi sheikh of considerable acceptability. So he was always looking for support from Sufi sheikhs and legitimizing personalities and institutions for justifiable reasons to be there as Sultan of Delhi. And it was a time, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of wealth was flowing, and a lot of commodity movements were also happening. Delhi was experiencing new type of economic vibrancy at this point of time. So against this background, if you look at the case of Nizamuddin Navliya, he asserted his moral and spiritual authority by keeping a distance. He tried to keep a distance. He knew that the purpose of Alauddin Khilji is to justify himself and legitimize himself and legitimize his political usurpation. Somehow probably he knew. That's why he was trying to keep his moral dignity and spiritual autonomy by keeping a distance. By keeping a distance, you are not isolating yourself, you are asserting yourself. Right. Keeping a distance would also mean assertion. So he is asserting his spiritual authority and his political authority, not political, but the spiritual and the moral authority, by keeping a distance from the the person who has been on throne as a result of usurpation. Right. But later we find at times the Sufi sheikhs are being frequently visited by the rulers as to get some sort of blessing. There were Sufi sheikhs and dervishes who blessed the rulers. Blessing ruler is one thing, legitimizing the evil action is a different thing. So I think we have to make a distinction between the two. And when rulers used to come for seeking their blessings, there were cases when the Sufi sheikhs used to bless them. And there were cases at times when we look at later phases as well, we find certain blessings could be equated with a level of legitimization. So it's a nuanced exercise or process that happened. But there were cases when we find even Akbar going to Muhyiddin Chishti's Dargah of Ajmer, right, or going to Salim Chishti for getting a son. I mean, these are all for blessings. And even Babar or Akbar going to the Dargah of Bhaktiar Kaki of Maghroli, again seeking blessings. So seeking blessings, that any person who has got a certain amount of spiritual craving would do it. And the person who is holding certain amount of spiritual sense would bless the person. I don't find a political implication in that. But the rulers always had a tendency to show that they are close to the Sufi space, and that was done with an intention to augment their power. They have already had a good power, but to show that their power is legitimized, is being sanctioned, is being justified by the spiritual authorities and the moral authorities. That way that they used to show an augmented power, and so that potential threat could be minimized, so that the opposing camps could be silenced, so that they could project themselves as overwhelming, powerful. So this tendency was there for the rulers, though the Sufi sheikhs, when we look at them, we had to look at them with a certain amount of caution. So all the blessings could not be interpreted as legitimization, but there were cases where the rulers approached the Sufi sheikhs for legitimizing their political ventures and endeavors, because there was the absence of the rule of primogeniture in Indian context. Against the background of absence of primogeniture, which was there in West and in many other places, the eldest male member inheriting the throne, in India might decide it. Weapon decided as to who the successor should be, and then they legitimized. After usurpation, after appropriation of power, the new successor tried to legitimate with the help of Sufi sheikhs, because Sufi sheikhs stood before the popular audience and they needed support from the popular audience, and popular audience could at times minimize the elite voices. That's why Alauddin Khilji lavishly threw the gold pieces that he got from Devgiri before the ordinary people, and the dervishes and the people of Mehrol, city of Mehrol, so that their support could be purchased. So we find this nuance process happening. Some of the Sufi sheikhs could have had an easy life had they agreed to the wishes of the ruler. Say for example, Pakhtiyar Kaki, he died when he recited Sama. The ulema was against him, and even the rulers always wanted some sort of a supportive person from the Sufi Sheikh. Had the Sufi Sheikh supported, they probably would have been bestowed with a lot of wealth, a lot of money, a lot of comfort, as the Suhrawardyas were being bestowed with earlier. Or just take the case of Hamaduddin Nagori, who lived in utter poverty in an agrarian tract of Rajasthan in Nagaur. His life would have been different. When compared with Bagaduddin Zakaria Suhrawardy, who lived in lavishness, who lived as a person with clout and power. So things would have been easier. But to lead a life on the basis of the conviction and on the basis of the dictum of conscience, that needs certain amount of courage to forsake the comforts. And we find some of the Sufi sheikhs had the courage. That makes the subject interesting. And there are people who had the courage to leave many things, while some others had the courage, in inverted comma, to have the things that some of their colleagues left. Power, lavishness, etc. Which they did not look down upon. They consider it's not a hindrance. By having these comforts and pleasures, I mean, I don't call them pleasures according to their perception. Probably they also thought that they, having all these material benefits, they are not obstacles for realization of God. Even after having these things, they could realize God. When we look at the type of relationship that happened between the Sufi sheikhs and the rulers, I feel that it was almost like walking through the edges of a peak. Yeah. It was an adventurous life for the Sufis, particularly Sufi sheikhs. On the one side, to keep the dictum of conscience as the superior force, and on the other side, the voice of the ruler, the overwhelming voice of the ruler, tempting or pressurizing and coercing them from the other side, made them lead a very adventurous life. And Sufism in simple perception for a person of this period is almost like an adventurous way of mystical life, challenging the authorities, challenging the perceptions of the world of the times, and challenging the existing understanding of the religion from the orthodox segments, to lead a Sufi form of, a mystic form of Islam, was really an adventurous way of living religion. Obviously, there involved elements of turbulence in their life, elements of disturbance in the comfort zone, but they preferred to be not in the comfort zone, but in that zone that gave them consolation, comfort, and peace and tranquility. So this is the way how I look at the meanings of Sufi activities for the medieval time. We look at the trajectories of life of many of the Sufi sheikhs and the type of struggles and conflicts that they had with the ulemas on the one side and the rulers on the other side. give me a person of the 21st century the impression that they were adventurers,
Right.
they were risk takers in the domains of religion.
Right.
And in that sense, I find Sufi sheikhs, Sufi personalities rather interesting and worth studying, which really stimulates and invites people for a different way of understanding and perceiving religion at a time when things are rather highly formalized, highly
Ritualized.
reactionary. Yeah, fine.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.